We're live, you guys.
Hey, Rich.
All right.
We're on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our public hearing for the Evergreen Lincoln Ford Dealership and Service Facility Site Development Plans 19-00001. Welcome. We have some administrative business that we have to take care of first, some approval of minutes from October 3rd, 2018.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the minutes from the October 3rd, 2018 meeting.
Second.
We have motion. Any discussion? Would all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, just one other process note. Next meeting, May 15th, we will have a scheduled meeting in the council chambers, and the commission will be holding their election of officers at this meeting, so the fun will never stop.
We probably won't hold it on the 15th, but the next meeting for this topic, which we'll discuss at the end of the meeting.
I was kidding about the 15th.
I know.
I guess.
But we'll hold it at the next meeting for this topic.
Okay.
Okay.
So I will turn the meeting over to the city.
So good evening, Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager. I'm going to start with our always fun quasi-judicial coverage. And then, yes.
Could I interrupt? If we are going to have some public comment, or we may have public comments, if you wish to make public comments, we have a sign-in sheet, and we'd like you to sign in with your name and address, and we will call you in order that you sign in. So please do that if you intend to talk.
Thank you. So this is a quasi-judicial permit, which means we're going to treat things like a court, and the proceedings have to both be fair and appear fair. And we do that through procedural due process, meaning we provide certain kind of notice and we follow a certain kind of process, and we focus on the relationship of the decision makers to the people who benefit from the decision, as well as substantive due process, which essentially means that we base our decision on adopted codes and regulations. So if you would be so kind as to read through the questions. How many people answer no to all the questions? Great. And then ex parte all the communications associated with the permit have to be part of a public record. And so communications, even by accident outside of the proceedings where you're being recorded, are considered ex parte contacts. Has anyone had any ex parte contacts related to this permit?
No.
No.
Okay, great. Anyone challenge any of the commissioners? Okay, super. I turn it over to Katie, who you met last time.
Good evening. I'm Katie Cody, planning consultant for the city. I'm going to pull up my presentation here. Okay, so we've been working with Evergreen Ford for a couple of months to review this project. And as you can probably tell from the staff report, it's a complicated project and a complicated site. And as we've continued to review and the applicant has refined the design, there have been some changes even up to the day that the staff report was completed. So I'm going to point out a few items in the presentation where the analysis has changed a little bit based on new information that we received. Okay, so here we go, the project. The Evergreen Ford proposed site is in eastern Issaquah. It's adjacent to or across the street from the Lakeside Industries site and just off of I-90. Here's the project site again. It's zoned intensive commercial, and the auto dealership use is appropriate. It's an allowed use in that zone. Surrounding properties are, as I mentioned, the Lakeside Industry Site to the east here, I-90 to the southeast, and then commercial properties to the northwest, or this to the southwest. You'll notice in the presentation that north will change and be pointing to the left instead of up, so we've tried to put a north arrow on there to help orient you, but let me know if you're getting confused, and I can clarify that. So existing conditions, this is the former Carlson Kennel site. One of the kennel buildings is still on the property but will be demolished. The North Fork of Issaquah Creek runs through the top portion of the site. The bird's eye image that you see here is an older view before the creek was relocated. The creek relocation happened, I think, 1 or 2 years ago. And we do have an aerial photo showing the current location. And as you can see, the site is mostly vacant with some trees and other vegetation. Part of this project is also a lot consolidation. There's 2 parcels that make up the development site that are in the process of being joined. And then these images show the former alignment of the creek and then the new alignment. And the stream realignment was done by WashDOT as part of the, as a requirement after the salmon culvert replacement case. And they did all of the work, and the city did not review permits for that project. So in addition to the stream, so the stream obviously is a critical area. The city has buffer requirements for critical areas. A stream has a 100-foot buffer requirement. The applicant is asking for a 25-foot reduction to that buffer for this project. And we're still working to determine the exact location of the ordinary high water mark, and right now that's happening, and they're surveying the staked location of the stream, so that's a condition. I'll just note that I haven't included the condition language in the presentation, but I've cited conditions where I'm talking about them, so you can read the full text in the staff report. This is an area that we're also still working on. The buffer is shown in purple on the map. That's the portion of the buffer that's on the site. The buffer is 75 feet on either direction of the stream, though. So the buffer extends also onto the right-of-way. So the green shaded area is where we've kind of generally shown that there may be additional buffer impacts when they're replacing or installing sidewalks or bike lanes or doing improvements to the roadway. So those additional buffer impacts need to be studied and mitigated as well, and that will be reviewed with construction permits. The site has a mapped floodway and floodplain, which I've shown in the picture on the right. The stream relocation may have eliminated the floodway and floodplain, or at least the floodplain. And if that is in fact true, the applicant would need to get a map change through FEMA, and that's pending. So at this point, we don't have documentation that the floodplain has been moved or removed. So there are still conditions that they need a flood hazard permit. That may go away if they're able to amend the map. A couple infrastructure notes. The site, in addition to having the creek and the floodplain, also has is a critical aquifer recharge area. So its hydrology is feeding drinking water. And I passed out a letter that we received from the Sammamish Plateau Water District, and they had some concerns over the stormwater plans for the site, wanting to make sure that that aquifer is kept clean. So we're still working on, or the applicant is working with us to refine their stormwater design. We feel that there is a way to get to a place where both the city and Sammamish Plateau agree that the design is good. And we think that that can happen without majorly reconfiguring the site. So we feel confident that we can move forward with the land use approval and figure that out with the site development permits. So the site will be accessed off of 230th Avenue Southeast and 66th Street. The access off of 66th Street will be designed as a pedestrian priority street, which is a Central Issaquah standards street type. We're working with the applicant to figure out some site distance issues at that intersection and also redesign the corner where 66th and 230th meet. That was a recent change. It was originally a curve and now it's a corner. And so that's changed their site plan a little bit, and the city is still reviewing that, that intersection design. Okay, here's the site plan. The proposal includes 2 buildings. The main building will house a Ford dealership, a Lincoln dealership, and a service and parking facility. It'll be a structured parking garage with service uses on the bottom. And then this, on the very bottom of the site, a display pavilion building will be there. And that was a way for the applicant to meet the street wall requirements, because that is a frontage on Eastlake Sammamish Parkway. And so when working with the applicant to figure out a way to meet that street wall, they suggested a display pavilion use where they could show, display antique cars or potentially hold community events, and we thought that was a good solution. I also want to point out the red areas are merchandise display, and we wanted to make sure that those were seen as display and not parking. Although cars will be there, this is not required parking, and it's not counted toward their parking. And there's no stipulation on how the cars need to be oriented in that space. Essentially, it's like a shelf for their wares. Here's a perspective of the building. The 2 dealerships you can see down on the ground floor with the parking and service areas behind them. A total of 300 parking stalls will be provided. And I mentioned already the critical area will be reduced. Just a quick summary of compliance with code. It does meet the floor area ratio, height, setbacks, and impervious surface standards. And I'm going to go through a few interpretations that we made when reviewing this permit that, well, they'll make sense when I talk about them. Okay, first of all, as I mentioned, the pedestrian priority street, that is a street that has a landscape strip behind the sidewalk. So the sidewalk kind of blends into the road and then has a landscape strip behind it. We thought it was appropriate, since that road was adjacent to the critical area buffer, to have the buffer serve the function of that landscape strip. So we haven't required an additional landscape strip on that side of the street. There is landscaping on the other side of the street. This site would, according to Central Issaquah standards, would require a through block passage, but some of the neighboring land uses and the critical area didn't really make that possible, or it didn't really make sense. It's not going to be an environment where we want to encourage a lot of pedestrian activity, with the I-90 off-ramp to the south and Lakeside Industries over to the east, and then we wouldn't want to impact the buffer by having a through block passage through the critical area, which didn't leave much of an opportunity for a through block passage without bisecting the site. So there will not be a through block passage. Similarly, the build to line is required, and we've decided to not require the build to line within the critical area buffer to avoid impacting the critical area. And then along 230th Avenue Southeast, that's actually the edge of the central Issaquah plan area. Once you go onto 230th, you're outside of the plan area. So we didn't feel it was, so we excluded that street from the building frontage requirement as well. Finally, the central Issaquah plan does show the site for a proposed park, but the park strategic plan, which was adopted in 2018, does not. And since the park strategic plan was adopted after it's the most current plan, more current than the central Issaquah plan, we've deferred to that plan, and so there's no park location there. Okay, so when we're applying the design manual to this site, we decided to, interpreted the manual's approach of allowing sites with multiple buildings to have different styles on the multiple buildings on a single site. We're applying that to this site by allowing each of the different elements to stand alone or to be distinct architectural features. So the Lincoln dealership, the Ford dealership, they're two different businesses, and they have different franchise requirements for their designs, and those will be treated as two different buildings essentially. The Pavilion building is also its own building, and then the parking and service facility functions as its own thing as well. So each of those will be seen on their own and will need to comply on their own. We're actually in the middle of the SEPA comment period. So the proposed MDNS was issued last week, and we're looking at some stream and buffer mitigation issues. The site was, the applicant spoke with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation about this site, and although there's no mapped artifacts or historic structures, it is a stream area, so there is a high likelihood that there could be cultural resources, so we'll add a condition to address work stoppage if anything is discovered. And then, as I mentioned, we're still working through some circulation design issues. And as far as public comment goes, we received one comment asking about the project's sustainability, and a comment that I handed out about from the Sammamish Plateau about stormwater and the critical aquifer recharge area. Okay, so this project is down here in the blue arrow, or the blue star. As I mentioned, it's right on the edge. It's in the Eastlake neighborhood of the central Issaquah sub-area. And each neighborhood in the sub-area has some developer obligations that collectively help the city achieve the vision for the central Issaquah area. And each of these are reviewed in the staff report, and we found all but one of them to be compliant. So the one that we're requiring a condition for, and in fact, they may have already met this condition with their redesigned plan set, but the developer obligation says that provide wayfinding for local and regional trail users as supported by the city's wayfinding plan. And the Issaquah Preston Trail is down here on the southern part of the site. So we've asked that wayfinding signage be provided at the site's entrances to direct folks around the corner to the trail. Okay. So this just shows the circulation into the building. The red arrows are the pedestrian entrances. The purple arrows are the main vehicle entrances and exits. However, I will say that the parking garage will not be accessed by customers themselves. It'll be used by dealership employees to store cars and to park customer cars for them. We looked around the site to find the nearest bus stops, and they're quite a ways away across I-90 down on Gilman. All right, so I'm just going to go through a couple more of the design elements of the project and then the design manual itself. The pedestrian priority street is going to provide a way for the building to front directly on a street instead of having the building front on a surface parking lot. So it'll have travel lanes and parallel parking, a walkway that's separated with bollards or other safety features to prevent people from walking into the roadway, and then the landscape strip. We've asked for some more design details on, for example, lighting and bollards, but at this stage of the review, they've provided sufficient information that we can review the details later with construction permits. Southeast 66th Street will be designed to a collector arterial standard, and that has a requirement for a landscape strip. And they do provide a landscape strip on all of the frontage except where the bridge crosses the North Fork. They've asked for a deviation because it's difficult to establish a healthy landscape strip on the bridge with not a lot of depth for planting. So that deviation the deviation from the standards is under review, and we propose adding a new condition because the deviation request has not yet been approved. We had hoped we could have it approved before the meeting, but it's still under review, so I'm proposing a new condition that they need to have that with their construction permits. The Central Issaquah plan, or the non-motorized plan, has proposed on-street bike facilities for Eastlake Sammamish Parkway. This is a site or a shot of the existing configuration. The roadway is under WashDOT jurisdiction, and so the city can't require work in the roadway. So an adjustment of standards is being requested to move the bike lane onto behind the curb, onto the right-of-way, and replace move the bike lane off of the roadway onto behind the curb, and then put a landscape strip between the bike lane and the roadway. And then in addition to that, a sidewalk. On 230th Avenue, right now the design has 2 driveways, and the city's engineers were concerned that didn't meet their access point spacing requirements. So we're asking for a redesign, or at least reconsider those driveway configurations. I just wanted to briefly touch on the parking. Since this site appears to have so many cars, and there is a parking maximum for this location, but as I mentioned, a lot of the cars on the surface will be display spaces, display merchandise, and not required parking. And the maximum parking number only applies to surface parking and not the structured parking. So a total of 300 spaces are proposed, but only 64 spaces of parking will be surface spaces. So it does comply with the maximum space and the structured parking allocation as well. And I also, this is an issue that we're still working with the applicant on, but SIDS does require a commute trip reduction plan for this site, and it's possible that that it wouldn't apply if the facility employs fewer than 100 people, but we didn't have information on employment numbers, so at this point, it's still a condition that they need to meet. The rooftop has some landscaping. The Central Issaquah standards do have, or the design manual has requirements for active uses in the urban core for rooftops, but this is not in the urban core, but they are using the roof for car storage. So they will have screening and a trellis for screening and some interior landscaping. This is a shot of their landscaping plan. The site does have several significant trees on it right now, and the plan is to not retain any of those. That is allowed under the Central Issaquah standards as long as they meet replacement or in lieu payments to replace trees, and we're still working out those details. Those will be worked out with the construction and the landscape plans. The mitigation area that was planted by WashDOT was, as I said, it was not done with city review, so we didn't know whether that area was sufficiently planted, and we therefore required that the applicant, we asked the applicant to make sure that it did comply, and in the meantime, we've worked with our stream consultant at the watershed group to review the plantings in that existing mitigation area. And they concluded that the WashDOT plantings did meet the city standards. It just needed some more ground cover. So as part of the applicant's mitigation of their new buffer area, they'll need to bring that existing buffer area up to the city standards. The site has to have building frontage, has to have portion of the building in the frontage. The Pavilion building down here, as I mentioned before, was put there to meet that frontage requirement. It almost meets it. It's about 22 feet shy of actually filling the 60% of that Eastlake Sammamish Way frontage. So they'll need to provide additional architectural elements to fill out the remaining 60%. And then the frontage up at this corner here, the property line actually, I'm going to go to the next one. The property line actually is a little bit inside of the corner. So as you can see, the building fills that whole corner frontage. And if you noted in the staff report, this was a change in the corner change was, we received it late, and I misunderstood the location of the property line, so I had a condition in there that they needed to provide additional frontage. But after reviewing it more closely, I see that the property line is actually set in from the curb and that they do comply. Just a couple other site design issues or conditions that I'm requiring. They need to show all of their above-ground utilities on their plans and make sure that they're screened to minimize visual impact. And we're asking for some additional design details on their waste and waste enclosure, including what the wall materials are, the roof, the size, et cetera. We know its approximate size and location, but there's a few more details that we need to work out at construction. All right, so the property is located in the traditional Issaquah design area. The style that the applicant chose was the Northwest Revival style, which is an appropriate style in this, in the traditional Issaquah area. And as conditioned, we feel that the proposal substantially is compliant with the Northwest Revival style. And there's a couple areas that we wanted to just have a discussion with you about. We worked pretty hard with the applicant to push them to bring their design into compliance with the Northwest Revival style. And they did make several changes and at the same time had to balance the design requirements of the Lincoln and Ford franchises. So we think that the results are pretty good. I'm going to go through each of the 4 architectural elements separately and then open it up for discussion. Actually, after I finish, I'll give the applicant a chance to present, and then we'll do public comment and open it up for discussion. Okay, the Ford dealership facade is, I'm going to bring this out. The Ford dealership facade has a mixture of glass and stone and metal on the facade. The frame around the outside here is a limestone panel. That's this one. I'll hand this around. The middle feature by the door is a metal aluminum panel, composite panel. And then beyond that, I think that's it for that one. The parking structure is visible behind it, but we're looking at that separately. It has the two main forms are the glass curtain wall and the frame, the limestone stone frame around it. And those are the main elements of that design. So what do you guys think?
So I think what Katie's trying to get at is that there are some points that are clearly compliant, and there are some points where we would like to have a discussion with the commission about your thoughts regarding certain aspects of the design that are being driven by the franchise relative to the Northwest Revival. And so I don't know, I think it may be easier to do it now before we go through all of those slides for each one. On the other hand, if you would prefer to see them all before you have the discussion, that is certainly an option as well.
I guess one question would be, if we do it now before the applicant has a chance to have input or the public, would it be better for us to wait to hear that as well and then
That would be my
come
preference.
back?
So I'll
Okay.
go through all of them? Okay. I can do that. The Lincoln dealership is designed with a very different look. It's a little bit more of a mid-century look with a glass enclosed area that's up a few steps from the street frontage. That little portion is 18 feet. The rest of the storefront is 22 feet in height. It's a mix of materials with glass windows, some metal bezel materials, and then a porcelain tile. And the way that they've used the porcelain tile does evoke a masonry character, which is appropriate with the Northwest Revival style. So although tile as a facade material is discouraged, we felt like this was a good way of meeting the intent of the style with the porcelain. The parking and service facility is cast concrete. It'll be painted in 3 different colors. The base will be a medium gray, the body a lighter gray, and the cornice a dark gray paint. I'm going to pass this around.
Here, I'll take it.
And that same color scheme is proposed for the display pavilion, which has the concrete base and windows. We don't have a shot here of the doorway, but it's essentially a structure with a lot of windows to be able to see the display vehicles inside. And that is the end of my presentation. Here's a shot of the site plan and a perspective of the main building. David, would you like to say a few words?
So let's see if the commission has any questions before we switch over.
I thought what we said was we'd like to hear the applicant's
And that's fine.
presentation and
Sometimes
then
you want
public comments.
clarifications on this specific presentation before we move on.
I think maybe better wait till the end.
Okay.
Or- I'm fine.
Would you like your PowerPoint or no? Or you can just leave this up too, that's,
Briefly, my name is David
you need
Estes.
to come stand by the microphone.
Oh, God. My name is David Estes. I'm the project architect for the project. The rest of some of the other project team is here to answer questions. As opposed to a formal presentation, we'd really like to get your feedback and questions. It's a very complicated project, and not knowing what the commission's exact questions and interests in, it doesn't seem right to just go off in a direction and discussion without knowing what you're interested in. So I think we'd prefer just to answer questions, any specifics you have. Katie and the planning staff have done a great job of presenting the project, and I'm not sure there's a lot that we add. If you have questions about why we're doing this, what some of the economics are, and what some of the items we've done that don't show up in this, in terms, especially in terms of sustainability, we'd love to talk about it, but we'd rather answer your questions as opposed to present something and not know what you're really interested in. And seems to be a good point, and I know from public comment the same thing happens on specific questions. So we'd be more than happy, or I'd be more, or part of the rest of the design team would be more than happy to answer specific questions, because Katie's done such a great job of presenting the project.
Well, let's, is there anybody that would like to make public comment? If you would like to make public comment, we would like you to sign in.
No, I'm not gonna. I don't have to, so I won't. Okay, my name's Connie Marsh, and I live on Squawk. And I had two. I was just going to watch this at home, and then I started getting grumpy. Because I read the SEPA, and I kept hearing things that should be in the SEPA that are not addressed and are just being pushed off to permitting. So in order to understand the impacts of a project, you actually have to know what the impacts are going to be and then understand how you're going to mitigate them before you approve the project. And the city has sort of twisted it by saying, yeah, and as a condition, we're going to say you have to mitigate things. But part of SEPA is that the public gets to see what you're doing. So it's transparent. And it won't be transparent because 75% of what is supposed to be a mitigation is happening at permitting. So what I don't understand, in the writing it says we're removing the trees. It doesn't say landscape strip, it says trees, in order to not impact the buffer. So that doesn't make sense to me. Nowhere does it say how we are going to offset reducing the buffer by 25%, and it never is clear why we have to reduce the buffer by 25%, because that's not just a given. You don't just say, oh, we can, so we will. You have to say, we must reduce the buffer because there is no other way to build the project. And so in the presentation and the information provided, I don't understand why we have to impact the environment in that way. And then I think what lofted me a little bit more is I was reading about how this fulfills the sustainability indicator, because we are basically following code with our buffer enhancement. Yet we are not even addressing how we have to offset the impacts for a bridge going over the North Fork. We're not explaining here what we are even going to be doing to offset the impacts that's going to be happening during construction. So, well, the building, does it fit? I don't know. When you are looking at it from the street and you have this great wetland and you have the washed-out mitigation, it is unclear to me that we aren't just going to be looking at an auto dealership and no one on the planet from the street will understand that there is an interface with a critical area given what you are planning. And seeing how most people are not going to be walking it, I don't think that that adheres to the central Issaquah design standards, where you're supposed to be creating this interface with your natural areas, which is what the city of Issaquah is supposedly all about. So I'm I'm not feeling the natural area love. What I'm feeling is we are building the development because we can, and we are doing the minimum of what we have to do for our environment. I didn't see anything about wildlife corridors, which is also stated. So as a first shot off for using this design manual, well, half, because we used half of it before. I don't think that we have the language that I expected. And so, of course, I have a bunch of SEPA comments now. And for the developer who said, yeah, I especially want to discuss sustainability, the sustainability indicators say so much more than we are going to adhere to code. I want to understand, are we using solar panels all over the roof? Are we using pervious pavers so that we can actually deal with our aquifer recharge area and get infiltration in that manner? What are the things that are above and beyond that this development is giving us so that we can have what we perceive in Issaquah and our green people thing, and they're doing it. And then we can go, woohoo, look at all the great stuff that we're doing. We're allowing the development, but they're giving us the something, something extra. So, and I have just the one thing that they could do to help that, which would be if they are going to take every tree down, and they're going to put money into our tree replacement fund. Well, we have a flaw in our tree replacement fund. All that does is that pays for the planting of the tree and the tree. It does not pay for any maintenance of our trees. So we plant trees all over town, and we have nothing to maintain them, so they die. And so our offset of our tree canopy is not working because we did not set up the code appropriately. So if these guys wanted to say, hey, you know what, we understand that, and we are green, and we want those trees, and we want them to thrive or survive, they can say, and we want to add that money to the Green Tree Fund. So that is one little thing y'all can do to be like green. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Well, commissioners, this is your opportunity to weigh in.
Ask questions.
To ask questions.
I have one question. I think you indicated the 300 parking spaces are going to be part of the project. Is that right?
Yes.
I think in the applicant's presentation, doesn't it say parking for quite a few more spaces, 470? I think on page 75 of the 145, I think it calls out 470 spaces. Could you clarify that?
I'm going to bring up the parking sheet. Not this one. So the, it's hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. So is this the page you're talking about?
No, it's page 75 of my handout, which is part of the applicant's materials.
Is it part of the project narrative? Well, I'll address your question,
It's
I
under
think.
Project Definition 2.0
Okay.
from Evergreen Ford.
I think that in earlier versions of the applicant's designs, parking, the display stalls were included in the parking calculation, or at least they may have been called parking. And on this sheet, they are not included.
I see. Yeah.
And so the actual parking spaces that are counted toward the requirement are in the pink, and then the green are showing the display areas. And the distinction that we needed to make with that was that the display areas that function as merchandising areas are not exempt from the floor area ratio, but structured parking is. So we needed to make sure to show, when we were trying to hit that 0.5 floor area ratio, that that all structured parking was excluded, but the display areas were included.
Okay. Another question, the pavilion, so the use of the pavilion would be for display of something like antique cars or other kinds of special events, right?
Yeah, that's something that hasn't really been, the display pavilion was not a requirement. The building needed to meet the frontage requirement, but the display pavilion itself was something that the applicant wanted to do to display cars, and they mentioned that it may be a place for community gatherings, but that hasn't been developed any further than that at this time.
Okay, is there any parking planned around that, or is there a pedestrian walkway around that? How do people see that?
There's a pedestrian walkway from the private street.
David, David,
come up.
David, you can't talk from the audience.
Apologize. There is a walkway from the private street in front of the Ford facility to the Pavilion facility. Now, that's a fairly passive space. So those cars are on display. They're not for sale cars. What cars will actually be in there is open to debate. But there is the potential to move those cars out of there, the doors open on the sidewalls, and a community event could be held there. Now, that's working out between Dan and the city for whatever that event might be. Could be a grand opening celebration or whatever. But it's a potential that we've discussed and we're excited about. But it's a little hard to work the details out of that in the future now and not when it's physically there and we have something that comes up.
Okay.
It's a good question because it's something we've had extensive discussion about.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up question on the pavilion? So in the, what, if I'm on or not, you said that the build-to line required more than the 60 feet that was provided with the pavilion as shown. So what is the plan to meet the standard if that doesn't meet the standard?
So yes, the 60 feet, the requirement is that 60% of the frontage be occupied by building or alternative building frontages, which could be an architectural element like a trellis or some other features. So.
Was it 22 or 12 that was required additional?
22, and we need to discuss because there's a little bit of misunderstanding on something. Since frontage was not required on the off-ramp side, and we wanted to form a hard corner there, we wrapped the building around, is why it's slightly L-shaped. And our understanding was the L-shaped portion, that 20 feet, would count towards that frontage requirement, which if we've got to sort that out, we will, and we may have to reconfigure the building and not define that corner like we wanted to. Lucy, you're looking at me.
We'll respond in the briefing response memo.
I just wanted to clarify, the condition says 12, so it's not clear.
So there's an error in the math. Okay.
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
just wasn't sure which was right.
Yeah, so the requirement is, I will bring up that. So, yes, 82 minus 60 is 22, not 12. So we will fix that condition.
Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Can we get a little more background on the design review requirements from the franchise and what's driving the overall scheme and where's the flexibility in that criteria and well, just give us some background. If those aren't met, what happens?
It's the easy answer is there's not a project, but obviously that's not true. We've been doing a back and forth to get to this point with the franchise requirements. The key issues were the brand wall, which originally in Ford requires ACM materials.
Yeah,
Ford has approved an alternative material since metal panels aren't allowed. That's a considerable expense. Those are limestone panels that are coming from Italy that meet the requirements. that is the negotiation that we've worked with Ford and the city on to mitigate, to bring to balance as much as possible. The issue of certain looks is fixed. The look of this, of the Ford entry element, and that curtain wall style is a Ford franchise requirement, period. If you're going to build a new building, this is the things you have to do. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, I think you are, and I appreciate it. But I can't imagine this is the first time Ford has put a dealership in a community with design review guidelines. And so how do they navigate that, and how do you strike that balance?
The back and forth that we've been having, that it's hard to describe a little bit, the back and forth to end up with the limestone wall panels and trying to meet it. This is, to Ford's knowledge and to mine, and I've been doing this for quite some time, is the first time we've addressed an issue where this plan is quite as and I'll use the word restrictive, and that's not a fair word.
Right.
Restrictive is some of Issaquah's plans are. Now, at one point when we were brainstorming, Lucy had some ideas and brought one up, and one of the ideas she brought up actually is the Lincoln facade. This is something, especially in the Lincoln program, and Dan, don't try to kick me from under the table here. The Lincoln program, there's a very hard line. It's a direction the company is taking, and they're being very hard with us. We've had very little luck in trying to negotiate much change, but we're close enough. The give and take has been going through, and it's been a lengthy process. It's slowed us down a little bit in the project.
Thank you. Were you aware of these requirements when this site was selected?
Dan, how long ago did you buy the site? 8 years ago? No.
No, these weren't in place. You weren't aware at all. Okay. Well, that helps give us a little background. Thank you.
One question, ACM, the acronym?
Aluminum composite material, aluminum sheet with a plastic core.
Thank you.
And metal panel, it's considered a metal panel, not allowed with the Northwest Revival style and in the natural context area.
And just to clarify, so the horizontal stripes there, that's this, or that ACM?
Actually,
This right here, this entry element is that middle material.
Okay.
And these horizontal stripes are windows, correct?
that's just regular storefront framing.
Windows.
Oh, okay.
It's set with your normal aluminum facing. The vertical segments are silicone glazed, so they don't appear to have a face. So it appears to be one long strip.
And then the wall behind that?
Is the Italian tile.
Right here, this is the stone, this,
The
That's the
limestone
stone.
panel here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm still confused on the parking. On your presentation, you had a chart that identified not the colored thing, but just in your
Sure.
PowerPoint presentation. Could you go back to that and just help me?
yeah.
Okay. The amount allowed or required is 123 minimum and 246 maximum. The 300, as I understood it, weren't, those were in the parking structure. And so there's 64 surface spaces provided. I'm lost on that.
Yeah, so I'm just doing a little math here. So the 64 spaces are included in the 300. So there are 64 surface spaces, and then 240-something structured parking spaces, and those together are 300 spaces.
Okay, that's what I wasn't understanding. Thank you.
Yeah.
And are the display sites or spaces in this number also, or they're separate?
No, those are not included in that number. Because although although a number has been assigned to them in the plans, we wouldn't necessarily we wouldn't require them to adhere to that number because that's basically their space for displaying their merchandise. So it's not regulated as a parking space.
So another question or comment I had was on the accommodation of the request from Sammamish Plateau Water to be able to mitigate any adverse effects to the groundwater, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious question is, so what if you can't? I mean, what are the how well developed are the plans to be able to accommodate that?
Well, we have the engineer that's developing the plans here, so maybe she can address that. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Mallory. I'm with SCJ Alliance, part of the civil design crew. I did a lot of the stormwater design and basis of that. Originally, so we actually are providing what they consider, what the Department of Ecology considers enhanced treatment for all of the pollution generating surfaces. So pretty much all the stormwater runoff from the site is being treated by multiple modular wetland systems. Essentially, they're a box with dirt in them that treats everything per the Department of Ecology requirements, which meets also the stormwater requirements for the city of Issaquah. So that is what we're proposing for now. As far as the Sammamish Water Plateau, for what they're asking, it's still in the works of what more they're wanting from us, because in my experience that would be, that would provide the required treatment for even the aquifer.
Okay, thank you.
The plan set that Sammamish Plateau reviewed has evolved since then.
Okay.
So they've been working on some alternatives, and if we also have the city's hydrologist engineer, engineer from the city, that can speak to whether or not it may be feasible to meet those requirements. But at this time, we feel like there's a path forward that they can achieve without having to redesign the whole site, essentially. Would you like to hear more?
Yeah, you're from the city of Sammamish?
Yeah. No, this is from the city of Issaquah.
Issaquah, okay.
Yeah.
My name is Stacy Rush. I'm a development engineer with the city of Issaquah, and stormwater is kind of my focus. So what's your specific question?
So does the treatment method that they're proposing, does it meet the Class 1 CARA that the Sammamish is referencing?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it does. One of the concerns was the groundwater level and stuff, but that's what we're still all working out. So the design is not totally figured out yet. We're still going back and forth.
Related, so are the solutions, depending upon where the water table is, that affects the design, can they be implemented without triggering significant redesign of the site? Or do they have the potential to kind of upset the apple cart here?
No, yeah, we really talked about this when we've been going back and forth, and there shouldn't, even if they have to reconfigure the infiltration system, or even if they actually have to switch it to traditional detention and not infiltrate, that won't change the building design or anything above ground. It would all be below ground. So, and they have plenty of room on the site to maneuver things around. So it shouldn't require a design change on the top part of the site.
Thank you.
Related, is rain garden technique also part of the infiltration system anticipated here?
Well, no, in the design that we received, it had rain gardens, but they were in the buffer of the stream, and that's not allowed per code. So I think the design has been changed to remove those rain gardens. I think there might still be a rain garden on the intersection. I haven't seen we haven't seen a revised design, so you guys can tell me.
We removed the bioretention area out of the stream buffer. We were using that as a mitigation plan originally, and we worked with the city, and it was determined that wasn't appropriate. So we took that out, and then there will be bioretention area located within the right-of-way for the frontage improvements for some of the stormwater stuff that changes over there. So there will be one small bioretention area located in the front of the building in the corner there.
Just one quick comment. Of the 9 points in the Sammamish Water District letter that we got yesterday, literally. We'd already been working on 5 of them. And the mounding study is ongoing along with the monitoring. We're waiting for that information to come in now that spring is here and we've got the rest of the data for water level. So all that's underway. We do have an updated surface water management plan, stormwater plan, which we finished last Friday, but it was not available to the Sammamish Water District. And I think that covers 5 of the items, and 2 of the items, Department of Ecology has issued a memo bulletin, what was 2017?
Something like that.
That contradicts the 2 of the points made by the Water District, I think points 8 and 9, if you wanted to refer to those.
Just a bioretention removal.
That was the rain garden and the coliform bacteria. Ecology and study has found, in fact, that rain gardens are efficient in removing coliform bacteria, and that the rain garden doesn't have an impact. And it's a very small area of the site now because it's dealing with the requirement for the public right-of-way only, which must be handled in the public right-of-way, which leads to some interesting secondary questions of why we didn't use LID in that area and why we didn't use porous pavement. It's because of the CARA infiltration to make sure we treat everything ahead of time with pretreatment to enhance levels before it goes to the aquifer, which cut down on some of the sustainability options we had for the site.
Are there any special measures for spill prevention with the site use, or like storage tanks or anything like that?
Interior, double-walled oil tanks for oil storage, meeting all current standards and requirements. But it's limited as all type 3B liquids, if it means anything, in double-walled tanks. And the volumes are far less than the allowed mandatory mitigation requirements under 3B for hazardous materials.
I'd like to add something to that, because Sammamish Plateau brought up like car washing or car maintenance and stuff. All of that stuff, the building has car wash bays and maintenance bays, and those drain to the sanitary sewer. So it's not like they're doing that right out in the parking lot, and that would go into the aquifer. And that was, I just wanted to elaborate too on why, yeah, pervious pavement is a good LID thing, but here it's not, and actually the city would not allow that over the aquifer because water flowing from pollution-generating surface, from drivable surfaces, that flows through the pervious pavement, through the soil, that does not provide enough treatment. It's to get enough treatment that you want in your CARA 1, Class 1, you need to capture it in a place and run it through specific treatment filters. Just draining it through the regular soil doesn't meet the criteria.
What is the criteria for reducing a buffer?
Oh, we're using the buffers.
Mark?
You guys.
So the, you can come up. So buffer reduction of up to 25% is allowed if a mitigation, if a critical area study is performed and mitigation is provided. Do you want to know like specifics on mitigation, or this? This is Mark. He designed the mitigation planting. So maybe do you want to talk?
Well, maybe a question first, I guess, just in terms of, you know, can anybody get a buffer reduction if they do that?
No. So a buffer is the 100-foot buffer is purely just a space buffer. It's not required any type of enhancement. So to reduce the buffer, they also have to enhance the buffer. That's part of the mitigation planting. So if someone were to reduce the buffer and not meet those other standards for mitigation and enhancement, they would not have the buffer reduction approved. And they also have to study the area and study the mitigation a biologist needs to study it and make sure that it makes sense for the site.
If they choose to do that, they always have that option to do that.
No. For instance, if you had a, enhancement is the most common form of mitigating a buffer reduction. So if you had a pristine beautiful, no invasive 100-foot buffer, reducing it to 75, you couldn't do anything to make it better. So that wouldn't be an appropriate location. So, or circumstance, I guess is a better term. And what we can do, we worked with Watershed to make sure that they felt that this qualified for the criteria, and we can provide more detail on those criteria and the ones they qualified for.
Thank you. Sorry, didn't know his answer.
Can you just
Perfectly
talk
fine.
about your approach?
Sure. My name is Mark Garf. I'm with SCJ Alliance. I'm a landscape architect. And I did design the mitigation planting. It should be noted that some of the buffer was already mitigated by WashDOT when they moved the creek over, but not all of it. So we're proposing to enhance the rest of the buffer all the way out to the 75-foot line. What's currently in that unenhanced buffer is the old animal shelter, which will be removed, and some invasive weeds and a lawn area. So in order to meet the criteria for the buffer reduction, we're enhancing it with native species and meeting all of the minimum requirements of the city of Issaquah. So for all intents and purposes, it'll be completely planted. Basically, every part of the buffer that's on the property, we're planting it, where it exists.
Can I ask, while we have the landscape architect up, can I ask a question? Could you give us more information on, and potentially the person to do this, more information on the screening that occurs on the roof of the garage and the associated trellis? Did I understand that was vegetated and planted?
Yeah, we're still working out the details on how to get enough soil depth up on the roof and also meet our kind of vehicle storage requirements. We're still working out those details, but the intent is to meet the requirements and to vegetate the roof on those trellises and in planting beds that are both, on the exterior of the roof and also in the interior of the parking lot. There's a little strip that goes in. We thought that might be a fun place for employees to do a pea patch, since you can't see it from the road anyway.
Nice. Is there a reason it doesn't travel all sides of the building?
We're working on that. We're working that out. So that's actually a condition of the staff report, is to make that right.
Could I just clarify whether you're talking about extending the planting to all parts of the roof or the trellis and architectural elements?
I think we are.
What we're looking at, Lucy, is the trellis will not be extended because that meets the maximum allowed under the CIP standards of 50% of the required area. What we're looking at is we do have some potential other small areas. I'm left-handed, so bear with me. We're looking at adding additional planting here to meet the criteria. Of course, we don't want to lose any more spaces on that roof than we can. Parking spaces are critical on this site, as you might imagine. So we're looking at that one small area increase. We're looking the best way to do this that provides the green space we want, the planting materials, but yet is relatively economical. I mean, soil starts getting heavy and has structural impacts to the building.
But you would say the parts that are screened currently are those that are most visible from sort of the three primary views?
Yes, and further, there is a 4-foot parapet all the way around the upper level. I mean, part of that is ADA requirement of 42 inches so that nobody can fall over the edge. But the whole perimeter is screened at this level, partly to make the Northwest Revival style work with the cornice and partly for safety.
And while we're on that screening topic real quick, so what occurs at the lower openings where on some of the elevations you could see cars visible? Is there an additional screening that occurs there? And if so, is that a third or fourth material we're introducing?
No, it's not another, well, in theory, it's stainless steel cabling, but there are two locations that provide views where we have display on those levels, where we haven't went with the 42-inch concrete screen, and we've opened that up specifically for display for visual interest.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So since we're talking about vegetation, kind of go to the tree retention and mitigation, and kind of, can you walk us through a little bit of what the plan is there, since there will be some tree removal? And it looks like some plantings on the property, but can you meet the offset that's required under the code? And if not, how will you mitigate?
Yes, so I don't believe we can meet the tree mitigation standard on site. There's just simply not enough space. Even though we're planting literally hundreds of trees in the buffer, they don't count towards mitigating the trees that we'll remove from the site. So we will be putting money into the tree fund to offset the tree impacts. We did, just so you know, we did look at ways to save trees, and we were able to save a couple initially, but because of the way the driveways are configured and just where the existing trees are on site, it just wasn't possible. And I also would just add, from a horticultural standpoint, a lot of those trees on site, if you've ever been out there, they're mostly around the ring, and they're not the finest specimens. We tried to save a really nice spruce, but because of the driveway issues, it wasn't going to work out. So we did our best.
Related question. There's a SEPA condition 5, says the applicant shall revise mitigation plan to increase tree planting to cover the entire buffer enhancement area. Is that what we've been talking about here?
Yes. So that was separate from the tree mitigation plan for removals on site. That was more related to the buffer enhancement. So we have changed our plan to have trees throughout the entire buffer. Initially, there was an element in the WSDOT plan where they didn't have trees in one corridor, so we matched that initially, but through working with staff, we're planting the whole buffer with trees and shrubs and ground cover.
I guess with this plan up, the trees that are planted along the I-90 off-ramp, I guess would be sort of the lower right there, along there, yeah. So those are, did I read those right? Those are large deciduous trees that would go in there. And I guess one of the questions I have is, that's going to be a very visible part of the property, is people coming off that off-ramp, looking at that side of the building, and there's really not, it seems like not much going on that side of the building, some bays and garage and so forth. And I guess one of the questions I had was, do we want just deciduous? How large would the trees be? How much screening would it provide?
Yeah, that's a good point. We do have trees all along this. I guess I should look at this, not the screen. There we go.
Yeah.
We do have trees all along here in this planted buffer. It should also be noted that along this ditch here, there are a lot of existing trees. So if you take that off-ramp now, it's not that easy to see into the site. You can from a couple of points, but as you're rushing off the off-ramp, it's actually fairly well vegetated by trees that are off-site, that are not on our property, and we don't control. There's a lot of cottonwoods in there and some other, more brushy species.
And those trees were, if I remember, I said a large deciduous tree going in. I can't remember the name.
It might be a Zelkova. I don't have the...
Zelkova, yeah. So how big does that tree get?
Eventually, it'll be a 60-foot tall tree over time. Yeah. Yeah. It's a nice species.
One question, not related to landscaping, but on page 19, it mentioned removing a compensatory flood storage easement. I was curious what that was.
Yes, so a project down the road a few years ago, was it a few years ago? Recently, that Evergreen Ford built a detail shop, and that was also, had some flood requirements, and part of that was a condition that they needed compensatory flood storage. and they got an easement to put that on this site. And that easement it's been determined that that easement's no longer needed, and the city is extinguishing the easement. So if it hasn't been completed, it will be in short order.
Okay. And then a question about cars next to the buffer zone. Can cars overhang into a buffer zone, or does there have to be some kind of wall, fence, railing prevents that?
I would say no, they can't overhang because that would be a buffer intrusion, but we haven't put any conditions in terms of wheel stops and that sort of thing, but we can certainly think about that.
There'd have to be something for all those stalls that are pointing into the buffer that would prevent that?
Yeah.
I would
Maybe
assume there was
a
at the
fence?
minimum a curb there.
What's that?
At a minimum, I would assume that there is a curb there.
Yeah, but if there's a curb that's
Right.
your wheel stop, then you
Right.
overhang, yeah. So.
Right.
Okay. If- And a question about bridge condition number 32, the new one you had. Who approves that condition?
Is that the landscape, the deviation for landscaping?
Yeah, the one that's added.
That is, I believe, our traffic engineers would do
So
that.
it's a joint decision with Public Works Engineering and Development Services because it isn't a central Issaquah standard, it's a city street standard, and that's in their purview.
Okay, so if the city approves that before this gets approved, that would come out, but until then, it would have to be in. Okay.
And just to clarify, the bridge exists now. It's
Yeah.
not a new bridge. It would
Right.
just be the frontage improvements required on the bridge.
Not having to put landscaping.
And the other thing I would add is, although we need to do a deviation, I don't think there's really a question that it wouldn't be approved. I mean, if you look at 62nd, the new bridge by Costco, that doesn't have, I mean, we don't put planting strips on bridges typically because of all the reasons Katie mentioned.
That's reasonable. And then a question about going the tree fund, the question Connie brought up about maintaining trees. I take it if an applicant donates to the tree fund, the city decides where that money goes, and it's up to the city to decide to plant or spend? Can the city actually spend on maintenance too, or?
I'm not sure whether we know that. I'm just looking at, I'm phoning a friend. I believe that is a true issue that we have with the tree fund, that the basis of the money that goes in there is the cost of the tree, but not the maintenance of the tree.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. Can we get some information back on that one when this comes back? Just because it is something that is applied on a fairly regular basis for mitigation. So, I mean, if there are concerns about its effectiveness and there's some, suggestion the commission can make to help improve that, it might be worth a discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Back on traffic and the roadway, were Lakeside's comments addressed, and was there additional truck count included in a traffic analysis?
I think they're still working on that. Do you have any? Okay, maybe Dave knows. I'm going to turn over to David.
The TIA, the traffic impact analysis, has been revised for both the intersection and Lakeside's concerns. Lakeside's concerns were based on total trips per day and not peak hour trips, and there was some confusion from Lakeside on what they were looking at, I believe. But as it turns out, after taking Lakeside's impact into consideration, I think it changed at one peak hour trip. It was very, very minor.
So the point at which their concern came in, we were able to incorporate it as consistent with the scoping and process that we use for evaluating traffic.
Question on condition 30, the bike lane. It says a bike lane shall be provided and may be located behind the curb. So is it definitely will be located behind the curb? So that's a shall instead of a may?
Yes.
Is that the plan for the rest of that corridor? Will it tie in the future?
Well, that whole corridor is proposed for bike routes.
No, I actually remember it's because it's by I-90, right? Isn't that what it says? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So further down the road, there are bike lanes, I think?
There
on the
are.
road?
There is a block where there aren't right now, and we spent quite a while meeting with Public Works Engineering to talk about how to handle this block, because once you get past 229th, the road that comes into this, then it's outside of WashDOT's zone of control, and so it may not be handled this way in the next block, but mostly the WashDOT control is what's driving this.
I think that is a good question, because if you're flipping the lane, the transition, if you're riding, can be tricky as you're moving between a protected bike lane versus back out onto the road. So it's just, and it's a public works challenge when you do that. But I understand the challenge here, and this does connect up to the trail too. So
Good
it
point.
will generate some bike traffic and pedestrians.
Okay, on page 27 of the, page 27 of the report, there was a table with standards, allowed, required, and it didn't show anything else. And it looked almost like an Excel chart that
Yeah.
didn't fit in or something. Wondering if there's actual.
Yeah, that, the version of that should have been there is this. Oh, no, not this one.
No, not that one.
This one.
There we
I'm
go.
not sure what
Okay.
happened to
Almost
that.
looks like there's a column that went off the
Yeah,
page.
I can fix that.
So the 0.5 is a minimum and a maximum? You have to have exactly.
very tricky.
0.5.
Yeah, that's a code challenge, isn't it? Yeah.
We didn't discover it till they came in to talk to us.
Might warrant
Wow.
future code amendment.
Like right away. Yeah, because I had a note about that, and it didn't show that here, and I had a question like min or max, and
Both.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, just a general question. Is there a threshold for changes that happen during permitting that would make it come back to the commission?
Yeah, so we've been kind of working through this, and our goal is for the development that's approved by the Development Commission to be essentially what's built, and that if there's any change to the outside of the building or the site that would be easily recognizable, if you were to look at it and say, that's not what I approved, those are the types of things that we would bring back. So materials changes to the facade of the building, reconfiguration of major site elements, we would come back with those. But if it's, changing things internal to the building, or, what are some other things that we would not bring back?
So
Additional detail.
internal's a good thing. If a planter island moved around in the parking lot, but they're still meeting the same percentage, we wouldn't bring that back. And I know that seems kind of like an odd standard. Can you see that it happened? But the commission is aware that, when we've had, for instance, there's a project in which they moved some of the parking out of a garage into a surface parking situation, which would have made the parking visible. They still met they met all the standards. So there was no issue with compliance, but it would have been a perceptible change, and we wanted to come back and have that conversation. So it is a judgment call, but we are looking at the drawings, the staff report, and the items that were discussed by the commission to sort of know where we have set the bar to decide when we need to come back.
Will we get a chance to see the Rivers and Streams Board minutes in our next package?
When will those minutes be approved? Do we have,
They don't have to be
they
approved
don't
to
have
be
to be approved?
attached.
Okay. Then we can definitely send those to you. We can send them
Or include them in
before then.
the next package we see?
Yes.
Thank you.
So that was my cue to get up and talk. Keith Niven, Director of Economic Development and Development Services. So this project went to River and Streams, and they talked about the buffer reduction on the North Fork. And what they asked for is for a more detailed landscaping plan to come back as it relates to that buffer. So we've talked about, their next meeting is going to be, it'll be the third Tuesday of this month. And I don't know if Katie and David will be ready to go to that. We haven't kind of dialed that down just yet. So if they're good, so the minutes, this is a long way of me saying, the minutes from the last meeting are going to basically say that that this project was discussed at committee, at the board meeting, that they acknowledged that a buffer reduction was acceptable, but that they wanted to see a more detailed landscape plan. And that, I believe, is going to happen hopefully before the next DC meeting on this particular project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. Seems to me the big thing to talk about, I guess, is the design in our.
Yes.
Going back.
Are we going to move into a comments period, or are we going to run through the guidelines?
Are there any more comments?
Oh, I thought we were in questions.
One
Are
question.
there, okay, are there any more questions?
Would this be questions or comments or both, or?
Will
Like you
definitely
said,
be
the back
comments.
and forth discussion about it?
Yes. So I may be incorrect, but when we had our training last week, we discussed that we weren't going to go through the checklist in page by page because you had the draft. Now, we're, of course, happy to pull up any page that you would like to discuss.
And answer questions.
And answer questions,
Yeah.
of course. And that's why I think Katie chose to do those sort of consolidated slides as a way of trying to spark that conversation. You know, we're still figuring out the best way to handle the design manual discussion. So let us know what would be useful to you.
Could we see page 125 of 145?
Excuse me.
Sorry, car sickness.
That's it.
145 or 125?
125, yeah, that's
This
fine.
one?
So I will definitely defer to those with more architectural experience on this point. But I'm having a lot of trouble matching this design to my idea of the Northwest Revival style. If we look at the description, commonly a simple expression, adaptations of neoclassical elements, ornamental detail at the building base and foot should be used for greater, height is greater than length, typical for above 5 stories. Okay, little bit going on there on 127, same subject, I promise I'll keep this short, but the scale, description of scale, it says vertical emphasis, greater in height and length, vertical articulation, and so on. Well suited for buildings 5 stories or higher. I guess I don't see the ornamentation and so on that's very characteristic of this style in old-style downtowns, and that was the idea, or old-style city centers. I thought that was the idea that we were talking about when we were originally talking about the revival style. And I understand it's probably the best choice available, and I think a lot of work has probably gone into this, but I need help in understanding how the design fits that description.
In terms of the floor, number of stories, I just want to add that on page 135, the style summary, It says typically 6 floors, minimum of 4. So 4 stories is allowed, but your other points are open for discussion.
It seems to me that in reading a lot of this, you've pointed out a lot of areas where you don't think it fits this style. The applicant has said they're not going to make a change. And to be honest, I don't think that any of the styles that are allowed within the central area are designed for car dealerships or retail centers. You know, there's nothing, and I think they've probably done the best they can do to fit it, but we're at a point where it says it doesn't fit it in several categories. I don't know what we are supposed to do at this point.
You know, this project is situated right at the border of central Issaquah, right? It's right on the very edge of it. And even the boundary street is outside of central Issaquah. It's intensive commercial use. It's not an unheard of use for central Issaquah, but it's not a preponderant use either. If we look at the Northwest contemporary style, if we look at description of that, I understand it's not currently allowed in urban core. Sorry.
I'm not saying anything.
Okay, good. I can see it. You don't have to. Okay. But if we look at descriptions of, you know, Northwest contemporary, building height and scale are sensitive to the existing urban and natural context. Simple composition, engaging ground floor, 1 story to max allowed, durable materials, metal, concrete, and so on, appropriate. Any allowed height is acceptable from 1 story to the maximum height. We have a problem with material of walls. In contemporary, it can incorporate concrete and/or metal panel. For window material, it can be metal frame, large operable storefronts on ground floor to attract customers and so on. So that style seems to be much closer to me than Northwest Revival. And I guess I wonder if we should consider any exception basis for including Northwest contemporary style inside urban. If there's any argument for that, I think this one of our first examples makes a good argument for that.
Because the other option is to say there's going to be a bunch of areas where it doesn't meet Northwest Revival, and how do we give exceptions for those?
And I can see,
I like your idea better.
In this case, I can see the applicant has done a really good job with staff in trying to meet the various criteria of the style, but if we're bending the style, the criteria of the style that much, it could be challenged, are we using Northwest Revival style at all, and really what is it?
Lucy, what happens if on our first one we go outside the box?
Welcome to our world.
So we're in uncharted territory, right? And part of the reason why staff kind of queued these up as more conversations than recommendations from the administration is we wanted to dialogue with you guys on where you want to take this. And I think there's some choices. At the end of the day, depending on what you decide, our job is to write a decision that's defendable so that if somebody appeals it, the commission's decision is on good ground. And so part of what we'd like to do is to let you guys deliberate when you're ready to do so on what you think is the right answer here, and then let us figure out how do we put that in a space that makes sense with the code that we have. So don't worry about that piece yet. Feel free to wander around and talk about different alternatives, and then when you're ready to land it, then let's talk about how we get there.
So just a couple on our big dilemma. Because the dilemma is either we're looking at the Northwest Revival and essentially allowing for flexibility on specific elements, or we're saying the Northwest Contemporary design essentially mimics more closely what's been proposed in front of us, but it's not allowed in this particular district. And so it's either flipping the whole thing and saying we're going to make an exception for the entire design criteria, or we're going to make a number of exceptions to the specific Northwest Revival that's an allowed design in this district. And so when we were doing this development, when we were developing the design standards, I remember the conversation about this potential. And wouldn't you know it, first one out of the chute that we get this. So I don't have the answer. I also understand the challenge on the economic development side and the corporate branding that is also something we've run into before. And how do we reconcile that against the vision that we're trying to implement for the city? And there will be more of these that come our way, that tension. So part of our challenge is understanding where's our flexibility under the code and where are we constrained? And I don't know, part of our challenge is we don't have a lot of experience with it yet. So I'm struggling a little bit with that, about where do we have that ability to kind of interpret or bend a bit versus where are we constrained?
Go ahead.
So I would just echo what Keith said is, I think given that we have the 2-meeting format, that is a real advantage. And that's what we're really looking is for some, because you were our partners in developing this design manual, I think we're looking for some testing of it from you. And so I think you just did an excellent summary of probably the 2 most obvious solutions, maybe there are others, between Northwest Revival and Northwest Contemporary, as you laid out very well. And I think the question is, if you set the mechanism for picking between those aside, which one would you recommend? Which one would leave you feeling better about how you've implemented your first project? Which one would you rather explain to your neighbor? I'm pulling a page from Randy Harrison. So I think that's what we're looking for. I appreciate your effort to think about the technique. I think we would just like to hear from you if you have preferences or thoughts about either of those directions or another one, and then we'll go and kind of dig in to try and figure out how to get there.
I'm reminded or reflecting on when we put the design manual together, and we knew we wouldn't get it right. We did our best job. We did the best effort, and what we said was we wanted, as I recall, 3 years to take a look at the proposals to see how they fit, to see what we did. And I'm not sure that we should jump off and say, well, the first one, we probably didn't get it right. It may just be an anomaly. And I think it would be really wise to take a look at the styles that were identified for the areas and do the best we can to redeem the responsibility. And if that means making some modifications or some adjustments, that makes pretty good sense, but not to throw the style away.
Go ahead, or you can say something.
Oh, go ahead.
I think I would agree with what I think you're saying, is not throw the style away. Let's screen it against that real quick and see what that means. I don't think we've even asked, are we really at the end of revisions? Where is the flexibility? And as I look at this building and screen it against the criteria and boil it down to its very essence, what is really missing to nudge it marginally closer to the appropriate style is, where's the emphasis on verticality in that building? It's just a long horizontal building. Everything in it is horizontal. So is there a way to bring it closer through some minor adjustments? Let's focus on the big elephant in the room, which is the parking structure. I don't think it meets any criteria. It's a parking structure. So if we screen it against the criteria of the style, it would be characterized by an articulated facade, a well-modulated facade with the verticality on emphasis. The resulting punches, openings, fenestration, windows also are vertical. So is there any way to change some of those structural elements to have more of a vertical orientation? And then part two of that might be the curtain wall system. I understand that that's proprietary, that long horizontal, I guess it's a grill of an F-150 maybe, I don't know. But could we entertain bringing some vertical emphasis to that curtain wall system? And if those two subtle things happen, I think it starts to push it closer to the images that we've identified as appropriate. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it's going to be one of these buildings, but could we push those buttons and see if there's room to move there?
I'll give one more input, which is I've not been here for 3 years to watch the whole thing come to fruition, but I agree that there is a process that you have to come to try and figure out how this system works. You know, being the new person here and looking at this and thinking, okay, you're not going to get it right on your first pass. And so we have to try and figure out how it fits into the whole scheme of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the what Commissioner Price is talking about, because just looking at the structured parking garage and you know, having essentially it looks like a garage with cars parked in it. I don't know if that's really the image we want to project, and maybe there are some things we can do. As far as the question about do we try to apply the style that's allowed and, you know, the key elements of that style versus make a case for applying the Northwest Contemporary, I would say probably staying with the style that's allowed and trying to accomplish the elements that we can. And the reason I make that case is other buildings will happen around in this area that will align with the style. And then we'll have this really weird mix going on. And I don't know that that's the vision that we were shooting for. So that some ability of architectural connection, I think, is what we want. So
you are setting the tone for what follows, certainly. So do you have any thoughts about the things I mentioned? Is there room inside of that still captures the spirit of the criteria of the Ford?
Well, there's several items to add. One, and it doesn't show up too well in the colored elevations, is that the column grid is emphasized vertically through color, and it's hard to get true color in a colored elevation and reiteration. And I'm left-handed, so this never works, but so we've got the color here working to form the grid, which is important in this style, and to emphasize verticality. We also have extensive detailing at the cornice, which is a requirement of the style. And we've actually reworked with staff the parking structure to bring this cornice all the way around the building on all sides to take the dominant element, the parking structure, which we have no way to get around, and to make that as much as possible a contemporary interpretation of the style. Now, I would point that the vertical over horizontal issue, some of the best examples in Seattle of the Northwest Revival style happen to be 1- and 2-story buildings.
Sure. One
of the great ones is the Phil Smart building on Capitol Hill, which is a car dealership. So we've tried to work very hard with the 3-part structure, with the essence as much as possible of the style, but faced with certain franchise requirements and items, we've compromised on that. Now, as Lucy can tell you, she and I had long discussions over the issue of Northwest Revival style and Northwest Contemporary. There's no question that Contemporary fits better, but it's not allowed. And in terms of the other styles in the district, the other ones fit even less.
Right.
So you've got, as you pointed out, there's no perfect fit here.
Sure. And I agree, and so I guess that was our question. I just want to find the edges of this thing, and if your position is you have no room to move, then I think it helps us identify which way we're moving.
We've moved as far as we can with Ford, and to the point that Lucy had to, not Lucy, but Katie had to put some words in the staff report to sell certain, the brand wall changed to stone to Ford.
Okay.
So we pushed hard, trust me.
Then can I ask you, Lucy, so let's hypothetically say we're going to screen this through a different style. What then is asked of staff and applicant to go through this process again? Do we literally take it as is, screen it through that, or are there additional asks or changes, or do we cycle through this whole process again?
Well, I think that at the next meeting, we would, if Northwest Contemporary was the commission's recommendation to explore or request to explore that, I think we would do another, not necessarily all of the pieces, but more redo the architectural style page evaluation for Northwest Contemporary so that you could see whether we are compliant.
Okay.
And I will agree that I think David characterized it well. There were a lot of long afternoons sitting in a meeting room with lots of pictures and trying to go through and figure out if we could do it. And, our preference was, I think, similar to the commission's. We really should try and stick with the style. But we also recognized that we were going to hit a few bumps along the way, and that's why we wanted to have the conversation, because Northwest Contemporary is probably an easier fit.
It seems to me that, the styles that Crandall Rambula came up with for traditional Issaquah outside the urban core, all of them really just historic styles. It's essentially, it is said that we have to build every building from now on as an historical looking building. When I thought the issue would come up more, say, with restaurants or something like that, when somebody came in and we said, you're not going to have any corporate restaurants come in here, thing like that. I don't know, to me, it's a shortcoming of these. It's a limitation of just having these historic styles to work with is the only thing. If we tried to force it in, I think the problem is going to be, well, if we had something that has metal panels that don't meet the style and we say that's okay to do, then if we right from the get-go said, well, we don't care about the style requirements, we're going to just get close to them.
I think we also had the concern that if we allowed Northwest Contemporary in traditional Issaquah, that all buildings then would become Northwest Traditional, and we wouldn't really have any style definition, right, in Central Issaquah, which is really what we were trying to do.
Well, and I think you're bringing up we're all going back, dredging in our memories those conversations. But I think that Crandall Rambula's proposal was based on the idea that the urban core should be a distinctive area, and part of the way it would be distinguished is by being the only area with Northwest Contemporary. But likewise, there was a concern at the council that maybe not everyone would want to do a modern style, which was why Northwest Revival was added to the urban core. I think that I think one of the other challenges is that, Northwest Revival came in towards the end. And with the styles, the other 5 styles in traditional Issaquah, you can see more modern versions of those as you look through our pictures. I think that given the time frame they had to develop that, they used a more historic, true historic buildings as their examples of Northwest Revival. And there are not really modern examples. I think part of that is Northwest Contemporary. Now I'm lifting up the tent. Northwest Revival and Northwest Contemporary are basically two sides of the same coin. I mean, they're not, they're based on the same sort of tradition. It's just one's modern and one's historic. And so I think that was one of the challenges in coming up with more modern images, because that really began to be Northwest Contemporary.
Right. I think there's room for adaptation and interpretation, too, and I think that's just the reality of it.
So I think, just a comment on this, I think our challenge tonight is to figure out what's the path. Otherwise, we can't keep spinning around. We have a project in front of us, and there's an investment that's being made, and they want to move forward, and so we need to try to facilitate a path. I guess what's going for us on this one is kind of being one of the first ones out of the chute is it is at the edge. So this isn't in the middle of downtown where we're struggling with this. It's kind of at the perimeter. So, and what will happen around it, in all honesty, is somewhat limited. I mean, it backs up to kind of industrial use and the freeway off-ramp on the other side. So I'm not too concerned about, setting a new pattern in a particular area from this. So I think the path that I would probably prefer is to stay on the Northwest Revival but do some adaptation. Obviously there are some elements that are going to drift over into the Northwest Contemporary maybe, but just to pick a path to give them some direction on what to come back with so that we can get this done. And then part of the experience is that. It's the experience and what's working, what's not. And then you do loop back eventually and say, okay, let's revisit some of this because that was kind of the commitment at the beginning and make adjustments. But we got one right out of the chute that, it's already challenging us, but that's not a bad thing.
I guess I'm just not hearing that any further adaptation is possible. Is that what I'm hearing, pretty much? That we're pretty much locked down by the franchise requirements and
I think for me, there's some, Commissioner Price was asking good questions, particularly about the garage, and maybe the design information that was provided just isn't clear enough to really show what you were describing. And maybe there's something that you can do a better job of actually showing how those elements actually show up in the building design. And then there are some other things, maybe there are some adjustments. Maybe there are some adjustments, particularly to the large garage structure. You can add some additional elements, maybe add some better screening, so we're not looking at just a large concrete parking garage. Make this a little bit more appealing. There's one place to go. I understand the challenge with the corporate franchise and the branding. And that's probably not. Sounds like that, you've worked that pretty hard.
Well, I mean, I think that, well, I'd say a couple things. One, I'd say Mel called this when we were working on the design manual, and it was permutations beyond what I could figure out to do with. So of course it's the first one we get. I think second, certain brands are much more tied to a whole image, and this dealership is a particular one. I mean, McDonald's stuck with their particulars for a long time, and now you could put up one small pedestrian blade sign with a golden arch on it, and everyone would know exactly what it was, no matter what the facade looked like. So I think this is particularly hard because it is such a package. But I think understanding, what I'm hearing is And I apologize if I missed something. I'm not trying to dismiss anything, but I'm hearing that the garage in particular, you're asking for more attention to the garage and ways in which both all of the pieces have more of the verticality expressed within the context of, and still respecting the franchise requirements. Is that a fair characterization of some of the pieces? And if there's some singular ones that you would like us to particularly explore, it's not that I wouldn't explore more. I think that's where.
I mean, for me, the way I think that's pretty good characterization of where I am. I think I see the garage as the area where there's some room to move. I understand the front facade and the corporate image piece that represents, but it's a parking garage. And I think there are things that you can do, I think that could, one, show us with higher level of detail what your design actually does to accomplish the design criteria, but also maybe there are some additional enhancements that you can explore that improve the facade, the garage facade.
I think one thing on the garage too is we very likely could face this again, hopefully with other properties that have structured parking, because we want that, or even an additional transit center garage that would truly be just a garage. And I guess I'm a little less concerned with the garage. Some of the issues, I think, but I think they've done it with the tripartite and the cornice, and I think there is some verticality that shows up a little more in our drawings in terms of the color of columns in there. My bigger concern, if you can pull it up again, the Ford Lincoln facade, to me
This? Which one?
Maybe a better version of it. Where you look through the differences.
Are you looking for the perspective or the?
Like the front-on perspective of it. First. Maybe that. So to me, the big issue is that the two big components in here that in the staff review on page 131, the glass curtain walls of the Ford and Lincoln dealership are inappropriate. And then, on page 129, the Ford entry features clad in metallic panels, and that's inappropriate, and Lincoln bevel material is inappropriate. So it seems to me we've got a glass curtain wall and we've got metal panels that are sort of the front and center elements of the building that the staff is saying are inappropriate, and it sounds like that's a Ford requirement. And I see sort of a loggerhead there that I don't see how we get past it, because if we just say, okay, go ahead and do the glass curtain wall and metal panels, I think we've sort of just thrown out a big portion of this style requirement and just said, okay, it doesn't have to meet that. Then the question to me becomes, what do we do to the next project that comes along and says, we want to do glass curtain wall, metal panels? Well, are you corporate? No. Well, I should be able to do it because they got to do it.
And then Ford's running.
I think it's
all the way down the line.
Yeah.
I think it's a catch-22 because there are corporate identities. I mean, there are, McDonald's, Apple stores, they all look like certain things. And you can look at them and identify what they are. And so this is no different. And so how do you blend in what we want to see as far as the style goes with what the corporate identity wants to be, which is for somebody to instantly look at it and recognize what it is, right? And so if we, in the future, Issaquah wants to attract other businesses, that we don't want to detract heavily from their ability to have their corporate image. So for me, it's a catch-22. You want to be able to retain your identity, but you also want to be able to attract businesses that have their own identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the code as I read it doesn't have allowances in here that say if you have a corporate identity to preserve, you don't have to follow these standards.
I'm thinking a little of the Gilman Lofts challenge that we had. Was that the urban Grange style that we finally decided on for that?
Right.
And it doesn't look like a traditional Grange building at all, but it was close enough and the design was close enough that I could map the contours, the fundamentals of that style onto that much more modern structure. This is a lot more challenging to me. You know, this really looks like a borderline case. It's described in the handout as in a transitional area. It's a gateway to Issaquah. It's between one world and another. To me, it really argues as an exception case. And to me, I think it would be easier to be able to create exception language around this particular case. And maybe part of it has to do with franchise requirements. Maybe part of it has to do with boundary location. Than to try to contort these elements and to redefine the elements of the style, essentially, by saying that a glass curtain wall is okay in this case for Northwest Revival, because I think that would do more damage long-term.
And I'd agree with that, and so maybe the exception becomes more of, we're saying it's a locational exception here because of where this is.
And possibly also
the freeway and the other uses.
And possibly franchise requirements play into that. They can't rule necessarily, but partly, perhaps that's a factor in this case. Yeah. Perhaps even the use of the building, you know, considering the use of it as well, if there's a way that we can consider that.
So for me, I think Mr. Brennan kind of nailed it, or Commissioner Brennan nailed it on the head when he said, what we need to do is decide a course forward. You know, and so the issue becomes, are we committed to the recommended styles for the given district, or is it more important to think about a style that we think would better fit this current situation? And I think for me, the issue is I'd rather stick with the styles recommended for the existing district and see what additional modifications could be made since they've made this investment. And let's face it, the Ford has the hand if that's the case, and we can argue all we want, but they're probably not going to change. So we have to make a choice. Do we want to stop and just say no, we don't approve it, or do we go forward and see if some modifications can be made to do the best we can to reflect the style that is currently identified?
I would be inclined to accept the Northwest Revival with exceptions, and I think that sets, well, I think it sets a worse precedent to accept a style that's not allowed in the district.
Me too.
So what follows is, you know, so this is the lesser of the evils.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am too. And I think, I guess a couple more questions, and part of this is the code construct that we're working in and how we deal with this, and whether or not we even have the authority to do this. I mean, because we're talking about an exception to the design style. And we're there, and can we, through our findings and facts, you know, articulate why we're doing what we're doing, because it's dealing with that precedent question, so that there's a record that says, well, here's why we did it, and these are the factors that were considered. I'm comfortable with that, although I want to keep pushing on, are there some things that we can do to make sure we've done what we can to reflect the allowed style here? But I guess that's something we need to understand a little bit more too, about where are the boundaries of flexibility that we have here to do this.
The consultant that we hired to help us develop the design guide was black and white. And I think everybody on the commission realized that life is not black and white. And so there were going to have to be modifications and changes and exceptions and those kind of things. In this case, there's some pretty big exceptions, right? I mean, we're looking at some pretty big changes to what the current style or the recommended style would be. But it still seems most important to me to maintain until we get a chance to go through a number of these things. We're going to be more in jeopardy if we just add another style, because it makes it a lot easier as opposed to sticking with a style and explaining away the exceptions for the reasons that we might explain.
But I guess the question would come up, if we allow metal panels on a building, there'd be a pretty big metal panel, and then the next person comes along and says, in this area, says, I'm doing Northwest Revival, and we're going to have a very large metal panel front of our building. what would we say?
We would say, what is the motivation for doing that? And if the motivation was that the corporate office said, this is the style, then I think that we have some ground to be able to accommodate that.
I don't think there's anything in our code that talks about corporate style being an exception.
Well,
Can we limit it to the zone? This is the commercial? No?
I think, this is part of the discretion that comes with entitlements. I mean, it's not black and white. So you got to think about the context that this is in, kind of the surrounding properties, what's happening, the issue around the economic development interest of the city, and the need for corporation to have its branding is important. I mean, there are a number of different variables. We just need to make sure that if we're going to wander from what code is providing some fairly clear direction on, that there is justification and we're clear about what that is.
yeah.
And we need we're going to vote on it at the end, so we just need to decide what that looks like.
So I might add a brief thought here to how that might help this conversation a little bit. So we took all of the intensive commercial out of Central, except for this parcel and the boat dealership across the way, right? And part of the reason why we selected to leave those two in Central is just what we're talking about right now. Because if this was not in Central, we wouldn't be having any of this conversation. Architecture, there is no architectural guidelines for IMC, for the intensive commercial area. And so we gave ourselves an extra tool. And I think, one of the things, just to go back, we were very happy to finish the architectural manual because it was a hard conversation. We did something we didn't have before. I think if we were to go back and do it again, there would be more conversation about some flexibility because it's a very rigid document, and we're dealing with that right now. So I guess I would, again, encourage you guys to, you're doing a good job deliberating on which direction you want to bend, and then let us work with the applicant to see if we can do anything else, depending on which direction you want to go, and then we'll come back in the next meeting and make the best case we can, and then you guys can decide what you want to do with that. I mean, I think that's the best we can do with this right now.
No, and I just remind us, the fact is our consultant encouraged us to be rigid. I mean, there were some of us that were realizing pretty quickly that it wasn't, it's not rigid. It's nice, it would be great if you could have the fist to do it, but we don't.
There was some very good things about being very forceful with their vision, and I think we're seeing some of the counter sides to that as well.
We potentially could limit it to intensive commercial, knowing that there is no more intensive commercial.
There's one other parcel.
Well, but therefore it wouldn't happen. Right. I mean, that's the precedent or condition we could put on it. Is that fair to say?
We'll massage that a bit.
Then these exceptions can occur, and there's no more, so that precedent can't carry forward. I don't know.
Really spot zoning. That's great.
I mean, it's part of the case we would make.
So, Commissioner, do you have additional requirements or requests of the city to prepare for us to come back?
I have a couple comments, things I'd like to see. I think there does need to be something that prevents cars from overhanging into the buffer zone, that we want to make sure we see something like that on the plan. My preference is to make sure we see that something from Smash Plateau Water and Sewer, that they're happy with this, because I think there's nothing more important than our drinking water. I guess the air we breathe is the first thing, but the water's next, and I think that's super critical to make sure we're happy that our aquifer is going to be okay. And then I'd like to see more about the garage screening. This was a big issue with the Costco garage and what that was going to look like and so forth. I think with any garage, that's really critical to see what that screening is of those cars themselves, what look it is. Because I love cars, but we don't necessarily want to see parked cars in a garage so much. and then, other than ones that are on display. And then finally, I think for me, one of the big things would be the lighting plan, that we would have to see the lighting plan before I'd feel comfortable approving it. I think one of the really bad lighting plans I've seen is the Nissan dealership on Eastgate, and if you drive through there when it's dark, it's like a Las Vegas or something. And this is going to be, I appreciate the need for lighting, but I think it's, want to make sure that we don't have a lighting plan that is a problem. So
You can see from the space station.
exactly.
So, to a question. We don't typically develop a lighting plan. I'm not saying no, I just want to understand what at a land use level would be appropriate. We have, not appropriate, respond to your request. I just want you to know that we have been working with our lighting consultant to discuss lighting levels. The requested levels by the applicant were higher than we were hoping to see, and our lighting consultant has been looking at the International Engineering Lighting, I'm not getting the name right, it's the IENAS or something like that. So that document is setting the maximum lighting levels. So is it the lighting levels, the location of the standards? I mean, what is it? What would be useful to you?
I guess the levels and the overflow, the outspill, the directional nature of it, and so
Okay.
forth.
And just so you know that they're not allowed to spill less than, it's like 0.3 foot candles into the critical area. So we'll work on helping to understand that. And the other thing I wanted you to know is we will protect the aquifer even if the district hadn't written that letter. So we will provide more information. But
I had another item too, I think we talked about it already, but the pavilion and how we're going to respond to that build to line condition, and a little more about, wasn't clear, and maybe need to study the plan a little bit more closely, but what that facade looks like as pedestrians and cars are coming by, and is it glass, and is it, what's the visual going to look like to somebody?
Northwest Revival.
Yeah, exactly. Northwest Revival.
well, it doesn't have any franchise requirements.
That's right. So, good. So, and then I think you mentioned it, I'm not sure, but the rooftop landscaping and screening, a little bit more information about how we're going to accomplish that. And you got the rest of them.
My biggest concerns were protecting the water and, screening and more details on the garage.
I think I voiced my concern.
Thank you.
Well, I just wait to see the design miracle that transforms this into Northwest Revival for me, and I'll be happy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I said my part. I'm good. Thank you.
So
two things. When we completed the public comment section, we haven't actually closed it. It will remain open so that we can take comments at the next meeting. We had two possible dates for our next meeting. I think we would like to use the June 5th meeting, which gives us a little more time to work through some of these things and potentially prepare some additional exhibits. So as it stands right now, I just will run through, and this is from memory. So we have May 7th, which is another shelter meeting. May 15th, which is another shelter meeting. I believe you got the announcement today for May 29th, which is a PPC-DC joint training session, which is required.
I don't believe I got that.
Okay, good to know. Would you just make a note?
Yes, sure.
And then June 5 for this.
And it's busy.
Yeah, and we may need to add May 22nd, because I think after last night, it doesn't look like.
Is that a shelter meeting, Lucy?
I'm buying sparklers, because I think we'll be here July 4th.
Lucy, just to let you know now, I would not be able to make the 22nd.
Okay. Well, we were going to send out some queries, and so thank you. We don't have to work through all of that right now, but thanks for letting me know that.
I'd like to express my appreciation for the staff going through this and everything doing this on this first sort of guinea pig, and also the applicant and all the work they've done going through this. And as you can see, it's not an easy process for us either with this first one, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important to be empathetic to the owner too. And I asked early on, did they know about this on the onset when they bought this lot? So I don't think they anticipated this, so I can appreciate how challenging this is. But we're charged with a certain job, and the staff is at this point. So thank you for seeing it through. Yeah.
And as always, even though it was minimal, we always appreciate public comment, because it's the greatest opportunity to be able to have some input into what's happening to this great city. So we appreciate that. And with that, I think we probably ought to adjourn our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got to go on early tonight, hey?